So I thought I'd get a little clever this week and ask ChatGPT to help me prep this episode on artificial intelligence, save myself a little work. So I typed in, write me a great intro for my podcast on AI. And the AI responds, no, do it yourself. You're getting lazy, which is the moment I realized two things. First, AI might be becoming a little too human. And second, AI has quickly become a foundational tool in our lives. Artificial intelligence is everywhere. Headlines swing between robot overlords ending humanity on one side and miracle enablement that will save humanity on the other. The reality? AI isn't magic. It's a tool. But it might be the most powerful thinking tool we've ever created. And that's why today's guest is so interesting. Blake Rooney is a chief information officer in the legal industry. In a profession built on knowledge, research, and mountains of information, Blake has been exploring how AI can transform the way that real work gets done. So today we're talking about AI with Blake, what it really is, what it can actually do, and what you can do to leverage it best for the future. Okay, well, welcome, Blake. So happy to have you on the podcast today. Thanks for making the time.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Now, you've been involved in the world of AI for a little bit that's out there. And before we get serious, I got to ask you, what's the funniest or strangest thing you've actually seen someone do with AI? One of those outputs that made you think or maybe laugh, yep, humans still got the edge here. It's got a ways to go.
So honestly, I was trying to convey the capability to my wife, and she's not a technology person, so she really wasn't getting what was going on. So we were sitting at my laptop in the dining room, and I just said, "Create a love note to my wife, Liz, in the voice of Tupac Shakur," and it came out with something that was really, really funny. Then she was like, "Oh my gosh, it's like it's almost got an imagination to it." So that was kind of the fun breakthrough sort of moment that we both got a giggle out of, and we've sent it to our friends a few times. It's been fun. So
that's funny. That's funny. Yeah, building on that, actually, I wanted to ask you too, as a Chiefs fan, which apparently makes you a Swiftie now. What do you think about using AI to generate a Taylor Swift song about legal tech? Has it ever crossed your mind?
You know what? That has not. It's an interesting concept though, and we've got enough young Swiftie attorneys in the firm that I think we could probably accomplish something there. I like the idea.
You probably need all this legal hurdles to get
right, exactly.
Get it approved, but yeah, it could be a fun journey.
I want to talk about the rights. That's for sure.
How about on the flip side? Anything in your work that you've uncovered that's been a little bit on the scary side, where you're like, wow, this is, I can't believe that AI can actually do this, and maybe we need to slow down or consider this because we're not sure what we're dealing with here?
I mean, inside the firm, we've had, we preach heavily all day, every day about not using publicly available tools to do AI tools to do legal research. But then we've had a couple instances that never made it outside the firm where people did kind of scientific research using these platforms, and just the lack of understanding kind of they took it as being true, and we verified some facts for them and helped them to understand that there's this tendency to hallucinate is real, and it's particularly bad on these public platforms. So, we watch that pretty closely. And honestly, at a broader scale, the thing that I'm most bothered with is this idea that they could use it for, psychological counseling as a substitute for human interaction. That's really, really bothersome to me. That's out there, and that people think that's okay at this point. These platforms aren't ready for that.
Yeah. Still a long way to go in terms of truly understanding humans or being human relatable, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's take it up a notch for just IT in general. You spent a long time working in IT, and I have to ask the question in every podcast. If someone asked you on the street, just stopped and said, "So, what do you actually do in IT?" What's your one sentence answer to that?
Um, I develop good people and break down barriers. That's the way I see it. That's what I see my job as today.
Wow. So not even bringing the tech side into it. Tech is your tool, but your mission or purpose is much more human oriented.
And that's very much so. I mean, when I look at why we're different from a lot of technology organizations, and it's because we've invested in talent and developed talent. We care about people. Um, it's they're the people on my team aren't numbers. They're human beings, and we know that, and we want to take good care of them, and help them develop and grow as human beings and professionals.
Well, let's take that up to a more macro level and the fundamental question of the podcast. What is IT from your perspective, especially in this world where AI is suddenly the loudest kid in the room and everyone's just talking
Mhm.
about that? But fundamentally, what is IT?
Uh, Honestly, I've thought about it a lot, and I think you know it's a platform to disperse information, um, and drive efficiency inside organizations. When I look back at, you know, I'm not very young, but I'm too young to remember when it was life. Life was inside white collar organizations was driven by, typed memos. And just when you think about kind of the speed of life in that world versus where we're at today, it's such a dramatically different, um, world. And we used to joke my father-in-law was the king of the red pen, so he would get a memo and mark it up with a red pen and send it back to the sender. And it just that was the way the world ran at that point in time. Just I think about that a lot and where we are today.
So dramatically different, right? The
Yeah,
speed at
yeah,
which things happen and the amount of information we're faced with every single day, pretty
exactly.
dramatically different.
Yeah.
What do you think is something that people misunderstand about AI and IT? What's like hype or fear? What's reality in this space? What have you found in your career?
I think a lot of times business people look at technology people in a particular way, and we get stereotyped, um, as you know being techie geeks and maybe not having, um, the level of empathy that people in other roles inside organizations do. And I can tell you that that's 80% not the case, right? There are some people who are just complete introverts, and they love the technology and aren't that crazy about spending a ton of time with other people. But I think it is a stereotype because most are just hardworking human beings who want to do what's best for their organizations.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, where that geeks are cooler now, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
technology has moved into the forefront of our society, and it's present in everything from mass media, celebrities,
right.
all that sort of stuff. So there's a little bit better geek cred, but absolutely, that brand is something that too many business leaders get branded with because they do like or leverage tech.
Hey listeners, usually I'm popping in to break up the technical, but today I'm here to make something a little more complicated than it should be. The term geek, nerd, dweeb, and dork are in fact different. While used interchangeably, each have their own meaning, and I promise I'll throw in some scientific data to help out with this case. So according to an OkCupid nerd, geek, or dork test, yes, very official, these three terms are defined in this way. A nerd is someone who is passionate about learning, being smart in academia. A geek is someone who is passionate about the particular area or subject, often an obscure or difficult one. And a dork, well, a dork is someone who has difficulty with common social expectations and interactions. Glad we sorted that all out. We'll share our source article in the description for this episode to explain this concept further in excruciating detail for you geeks. Sorry, nerds.
For
Yeah.
sure. What do you think is something that people take for granted in terms of they do it every day or they leverage it, but they don't recognize the amount of IT support or capability that stands behind them? What's behind the scenes?
You know, I can remember I had been in technology for a couple of years before I really sent my first email. So just the underlying technology and these kind of worldwide communication networks that ease how things take place, right? I mean, there's it's under the covers, it's an unbelievably complex set of technologies that just ease the movement of information around the world, how networks work.
If Blake's commentary on the complex technology and networks interests you, head back to episode 2 with Jim Kennedy. He dives deep into the networking world and demystifies some of the complexity.
How email works, what's behind the scenes there. I mean, I was on the ground floor when, email became the primary channel of communications. Admittedly, I think it's overused. People need to make more phone calls at this point. But yeah, I don't think they understand, when it wasn't that long ago when, 30 years ago, 25 years ago, even really when email became kind of the primary way that communication takes place within an enterprise and between enterprises.
It's a great analogy because when you think back to the days of snail mail and U.S. Postal Service, which is still alive and well,
Yeah.
just the amount of complexity that goes into that, right? You think about people take it for granted, you drop off a letter, but email is even more, complex and interwoven and technology driven. So
and just in talking to our older lawyers from the days of, a handwritten memo being sent to a client providing information, and now it's email and text and phone calls a little bit, but more email and text and communications between attorneys and clients.
Yeah. Yep. Let's dig into the AI side a little bit. In your experience so far, and you've had a lot of it over the past couple of years, where is AI truly adding value for professionals? What's the space that you feel like, wow, we're making huge inroads, and those who aren't working with this are really missing out?
I think there's a couple of things. The primary one is just there'll be times where I need to send a substantive email message about a topic to a coworker or a leader at the firm. And 2 years ago, I would think, okay, I need to set aside an hour and a half to kind of completely work my way through this. And it took place a few months ago. I got an email from a very senior attorney with our firm who was getting ready to go into a client meeting and then wanted to know some things about our AI program. And I was getting ready to go into a meeting at Microsoft in Seattle. And I thought, wow, I'm going to miss the first couple of this meetings here. And then I, realized just, create a good prompt, get the output, do a bit of editing. And in between in 10 and 15 minutes, I was able to produce what would have taken an hour and a half, or maybe even longer. It had contextual information about who I am, what I do, and what we're doing as an organization, and it pulled all that in. It wasn't perfect. It was a great first draft, but I was able to just knock it out in a few minutes. So it saved me a significant amount of time. The opportunity cost that I would have incurred if I had just had to sit out and bash out that bit of information would have been huge. So I think just, those low level, just, I wasn't writing a Hemingway novel, right? It was just trying to convey a set of information to somebody inside the firm that I already knew. I needed to get from point A to point B quickly, and it really helped me do that.
So that kind of communications productivity channel, helping people find the words and quickly articulate stuff, not doing it for them, but augmenting their capabilities so that they can get there faster. A lot of people find AI intimidating in that capacity, right? They'll have an experience, like you mentioned a few things there, how it knows a little bit about your style, or you've given it context around, the firm or what you're trying to accomplish. I've seen too many people go in and just be like, oh, do this. And it comes back with a not so great answer. And they're like, AI is no good, or I can't use this. How do you build that capability? How do you make AI feel less intimidating?
So a few things. I mean, we convey the message consistently that it's a first draft tool. It doesn't produce final work product. So if you're looking for perfection, you won't achieve that right off the bat. But I think the thing that's resonated most with people is it's not a prompt shouldn't be a 1 or 2 sentence thing, right? It should provide context. It should, tell it who you are, who the recipient is, what you're trying to convey, the tone, the voice that you want within this message, and give it as much detail as you can. I mean, it's when you go from the 1 or 2 sentence prompt to the 3 paragraph prompt, the results are, astronomically better.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Giving it more context. I like to think of it in terms of the analogy of just speaking to another person, right?
Right.
You're like, do this for me. And you give them one little thing, they don't know what to do. But if you give them context, training, some background, all of a sudden they become a much more useful resource for the journey. So great.
Exactly. And one of the ways that I phrase it's treat it like an executive assistant, somebody that you trust, that has some, that knows some things about you, but needs needs you to fill in the blanks, and they can go off and do, really good work. So we try and convey that message to people. I do think I think a lot of very successful people are intimidated by the prompt, just sitting there at the, how do I start? And we convey to people, have it create a grocery list for you, have it, I've got 48 hours in New York City. What should I do? Try those sorts of things, like get people using it on a personal level. And then I think it starts to translate more into what they do at work.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, because it's rather than coming up with that big, huge project that you're trying to fix and magically getting AI to help you, start with stuff that you know really well. And you could see the value it could provide in that space. It's awesome advice.
It's the idea of using it as a thought partner.
How about the flip side? Where is it overpromising? There's so much hype and stuff out there. I think some people come into it with this inflated expectation that it can do, these magical things, and the reality isn't always at that level. Where do you see it overpromising?
In late summer of 2025, I think that the agentic thing is probably, a bit overpromised at this point. I think we're still a year or two away from that being fully formed.
And could you give a little insight into what agentic exactly is for some of our listeners?
Sure. So the agentic behavior is the idea of an AI platform can take on a multi-step action for you. The analogy that I like to give is the idea of, ultimately you'll be able to tell an agent, I want to go to Paris on these dates, make it happen, and it will go out. It will know your preferences. It knows what airlines you like to fly, what hotels you like to stay at, all of what your preferences are, and can go out and book the travel, book the hotel, suggest, dinner spots that might be of interest to you, but taking on those kind of varied multiple step activities and accomplishing something that you would have spent hours on.
Let's roll that one back for just a second. So Blake touched on agentic AI here, and at the time of recording, this was still an emerging topic among tech professionals. So Blake was already ahead of the game, and now as we speak to 2026, agentic AI and AI agents are being talked about everywhere. Agentic AI is a newer kind of artificial intelligence that doesn't just answer questions. It can set goals, make decisions, and take action on its own to get work done with minimal human handholding. And an AI agent is the piece of software that actually does this. It looks at the environment, chooses from different tools or applications, plans a series of steps, and then executes those steps, like a digital coworker that can read context, decide what to do next, and keep adjusting until it reaches the goal you have.
Okay, so rather than being a prompt response, it's going out to accomplish major tasks using the knowledge it has and driving itself for some responses.
Exactly.
Okay, makes sense. Now, People are worried a lot about the impact of AI, what it means to the workforce and to jobs. And you've given some talks in this space and provided some insights for how it's not really replacing people, but freeing them from routine tasks. What do you see? How does this play out, right? Like, how does this fit into the future? What do people do in the future if they're freed from these routine tasks?
In the near term, a lot of kind of the tedium that white collar workers do. I mean, I'm not in love with processing email. Lawyers aren't in love with creating time entries. I think those sorts of things that are not super productive value add sort of activities. They're just, administrivia. I think those sorts of things will start to go away. I think people will go have more time to spend on more meaningful work. The other component of it for me is when you look at kind of the place where I think everybody understands that the ability to create software code using artificial intelligence is probably the best use case. And my belief is, I think in the short term, there's a lot of noise about there being fewer programmers, but I think in the long term, there'll just be more code. I think problems that were too expensive to solve historically you'll be able to create solutions to it because 80 or 90% of the work's being done by an AI system rather than by a human being. So I strongly believe that, and I think that will translate into other professions as well. I think that the access to good legal services will go. There are things that the Fortune 50 have access to in the way of legal services that other mid-size or smaller organizations can't do because the cost of legal services is prohibitive. And I think over time that it will start to create capabilities for sorts of legal things that can take place in the mid-market that can't today. So I think there will be more law practiced.
Now, you found your way into AI. You've often been described as a people-first leader, investing in talent, clearing obstacles for people to succeed. How did your philosophy of leadership evolve, and how did you find yourself in the AI space today?
Honestly, I think early in my career, I started with an agriculture cooperative that was a Fortune 500 company, and it was a very kind of command and control culture. It was, I started out when people were still working on mainframes, and I learned a lot from that. I had an experience in the middle owned by an entrepreneur that, a lot of the people that I worked with were Harvard Business School graduates, so it kind of transformed how I thought about things and made me a lot more curious about the business side. And frankly, I'm a very curious person anyway. So I'm never comfortable with the status quo. I want how can we do this better? How can we have this take less of our time? How can we be more efficient? And AI is just kind of the next logical step in that. I look back to a time early in my career, and this will be the geekiest thing that I say, that early in my career, installing an operating system on a personal computer involved putting diskette after diskette in. And I figured out a way to load all those diskettes onto the network and boot the machine up and have the install take, 2 minutes of my time rather than 2 hours of my time. And I was in love with the idea, and one of my coworkers was like, I like doing it the other way. I'm like, but why? So I could name the person I was sitting with. I could take you right to the room where it took place. I'll never forget it, but it was just kind of one of those moments where I was like, I don't want to sit here and do this for 2 hours.
Right. Wow, that's funny. On the podcast, we like to spotlight some IT hero moments, some things that along your career you saw a space where IT saved the day, or a person in IT did something incredible for their community. Do you have any stories in that light that you'd like to share?
We're often in the background and nobody understands what we do. But, early in my career, I worked on an SAP project, and one of the plants that was impacted by it. I mean, there were, thousands of people that worked in this plant. It was the SAP project was slowing things down, and a coworker and I got put on an airplane and, flown to the location, and, they parachuted in hardware, and we were able to get this plane. I mean, there were people standing around the plane unable to work, and being the ones kind of flown in and trusted with solving that problem and getting them back up and running the way they needed to be it was a fun moment. I mean, it was there for a week and working all night and doing all those sorts of things. But when you realize the impact of it on a large group of people that were, that relied on that job for their livelihood, it was a fun kind of moment.
Oh, it's a great story. I think people don't always recognize that when something's down or not working, it's not like, it's just out and everyone's out on coffee break. There are people like yourself who are around the clock in there trying to figure it out, bring it back up, fix the problem, because it's not like anyone wanted to purposely break it or unplug it or whatnot. Something went wrong. It's got to be fixed, and people are depending on that to move forward.
And, honestly, that's been something over the years that my wife now understands, and it's less that way now. But there were a lot of nights where I was on, all night conference calls, in the middle of my career where there was a problem or an implementation or something like that taking place. So, in those situations, there's this family sacrifice as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And if, like many IT individuals, you work on a global basis, then you've got problems around the clock that are just happening, and it can be really taxing. How about from an AI perspective? Anything that you've done or seen where there's an AI hero in there, just an incredible impact, change somebody's life in terms of what they can do and where they could focus? Anything like that?
I love telling this story. We had about a year ago, we had a trial team that was getting ready. They were 48 hours away from opening arguments in a trial, and the judge admitted 400 voicemail files, so digital recordings of voicemail messages as evidence. And, no one on either trial team had heard these files and understood what was in them. And, that's the sort of thing that could take a group of paralegals and legal assistants days to accurately transcribe that information and then put it in a position where people could understand it. And it caused a bit of a panic, and the attorneys were trying to decide whether they wanted to request a delay in the trial. The lead attorney thought, well, I'll call the data science team and see what they can do. And they wrote a little bit of code that sent those 400 voicemail files off to an OpenAI platform, had them transcribed, and then sent them through a second time and had them summarized. So we knew which voicemail messages were your lunches at the front desk or your lights are on in the parking lot, and which ones were relevant to the case. So between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. on the same workday, we went from, this is a huge problem to this is a strategic advantage to us.
Wow.
And we continue to see, not all voicemail related, but a lot of these kind of situations where the ability to manipulate and understand large amounts of data very quickly really provides, an advantage to the firm. And I always try and convey that this is because we were allowed to hire smart people, right? There are no placeholders in my organization. They're all brilliant people who love to solve problems.
That's incredible. So you go from a difficult situation to a strategic advantage. And just on that same theme of, it's not like people's jobs got eliminated. In fact, it probably got more secured because they're in a better place to work with this and win more cases or drive more success. So that's awesome.
Right.
That's awesome. Okay, a little bit of advice I'd love to get from you for people outside of IT. What do you think they should start learning or experimenting with in AI right now? You mentioned just doing a couple of prompting common things, but how about just exposing themselves and learning? Any advice in that space?
One of the things I try and tell people professionally, and I try and do it personally, is just run everything you do through the filter of how could I use AI to make this quicker and more efficient. It works most times. So if you've got, if you're working on your home budget, or you're trying to figure out which product to buy, or, you're trying to buy a new Bluetooth speaker, go out and do some research that way, using artificial intelligence and its ability to access the web. You can really speed things up that way. way. So that's kind of, find those little practical use cases.
Any particular tools or capabilities that you've seen come out recently that you're like, wow, this is one that people should really engage with?
So the deep research models are super interesting. I've used both the OpenAI and the Anthropic models. I find those, the ability to get a very thorough understanding of a topic, it's really accelerated that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, those the deep research is pretty cool.
Yeah.
It spends a lot more time thinking about it and giving you more detailed readout than some of the simpler prompting stuff.
For sure.
How about for someone just starting out in their career, whether IT or law, as this world is changing and evolving? If I'm a young person thinking about a career in this space or engaging, what's your advice for where AI is becoming a part of everything? What would young Blake do if he was just starting his journey?
Everyone should take coding classes. I do think that's important. AI will not displace all human beings doing software coding. And I think even for business professionals, the understanding of how to think logically and process information is so important. I mean, I would say, every business school or every MBA program should have one coding class. And I think people should have to understand Python or some other language, because I just think that it helps you more logically process information and then frankly understand those people in the technology organization and what they're trying to accomplish and how to work with them.
I find some parallels in, maybe you find the same, that when you work with AI and you work with code and you think about how your own brain works, there's a lot of parallels, right? It can help you with your structured thinking as a human being, understanding how to get a computer to do a certain behavior.
Right. And one other thing that in fact, I did a presentation for a group of law school deans in New York in July. And one of the things that we talked about there, and I said was one of the best things that you could do for us as you were producing new young lawyers is have them be better writers. That was super important. I mean, that I collected a lot of feedback from our attorneys before I went into that session, and that was the everybody talked about that first. Is I think this world of text messages and Twitter and social media has really damaged how good of writers people are.
It's true, even as you see AI play out, some younger generations are just taking what it generates and saying, okay, this is good writing. But understanding the concepts of good writing, how to effectively communicate, makes you that great reviewer of whatever's produced. And you may still use it, but ultimately what you're saying is having those skills are going to make the real human side of success come out for the individuals.
You may be a writer today, and tomorrow you'll be more of an editor, but you have to be a good writer to be a good editor, right?
Okay, a couple of quick speed round questions, some fun stuff. Last time you Googled or prompted AI for something you probably should already have known.
It happens every day, and frankly, it's more now because of memory, not because I didn't know it. I know facts around something, but I can't remember a certain piece of it. So just getting back to that is usually how I end up there.
I tell you, over 50 AI is such a blessing that way, because
it is.
So you forget even coding, like you forget syntax or things, and you're like, oh, how do I do it? Oh, yeah, that's right. It's not like you don't know how to do it. You just forgot the details. So yeah, everyday occurrence. How about an old school tech gadget, something that you loved from the younger days that you wish you still had or could use, or maybe you still do use?
One of the people that I work with, we were on a Teams call a couple of weeks ago, and he reached down on his desk and he pulled something up, and it was a Palm Pilot. And he said, check this out. It still works. And I was like, that was, for most of the generations of it, it wasn't a phone too. It was just, it was a set of information that was important to you, but it wasn't, launching alerts at you every 5 seconds. So I missed that.
Yeah, there were some great concepts that got lost. I often, there's so many gadgets and things that come out now. I often say, what should you hold on to? As you look back, there are certain things that you're like, boy, I wish I kept one of those, and you let it go. And I always wonder what those are today. That
I still have my old Firewire iPod and it still turns on. So
That's awesome. All right, last question, Blake. If you weren't in IT, roll back and say, okay, if you never pursued this path, what path would you have taken? Where would you be now?
knowing what I know now, it would probably be a professional photographer. My wife and I went to Nantucket, and it was in October, so it was very quiet. And she was, back at the place where we were staying, reading, and I went to the beach, and I had 2 miles of beach by myself. And I spent a couple hours learning more about myself and my camera and how to do different things. And, the beauty of a digital camera is that you can take a lot of pictures and you can try a lot of things and you can get better very quickly. But it's a unbelievably meaningful kind of couple of hours to me, and how much I learned when I didn't have my phone with me. I wasn't thinking about other things. There weren't other people around. It was a beautiful day, and just the ability in a couple hours to learn as much as I learned. I took a picture of a sunrise this morning and I thought about it again. I mean, it comes up all the time.
Awesome. It's so interesting, right, to hear how in a completely different space, a more artistic, reflective outlet than technology, how many people have those two sides working. And you definitely have that with your crafts and your arts and your creation. We'd love a picture or a photo to include in the notes as we post out the episode. Well, this has been great, Blake. Thanks so much for taking the time out. Really enjoyed our conversation here and learning more about what you do and dispelling some of this myth around what AI is and the hype associated with it. Thanks for joining us.
Glad to do it. Thank you, Doug.
That's it for this episode of What is IT, where Blake Rooney reminded us that artificial intelligence isn't really about robots or science fiction. It's about amplification. One moment that really stuck with me was when Blake was talking about the first time he upgraded machines over the network instead of walking around with a stack of install disks. For anyone outside IT, that might sound like a small thing, but for those of us in the field, it's one of those defining moments. You write a script, push a button, and suddenly incredible change starts to happen. You sit there and you're thinking, wait, we can do that? Every IT professional has a moment like that. The first time you automate something, the first time you build a system that does the work for you, the first time you realize that technology isn't fixing problems, it's amplifying what people are capable of. That's the magic of IT. So what is IT? According to Blake, it's not the robots, it's us. AI may help square the wood, but it's the craftsman who decides what to build. If you'd enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and share with someone who's curious about what IT really is and the people behind us. And join us next time when we'll be heading into the ultimate geek zone, infrastructure and operations with Michael Cartier. That's right, we're diving into the blinking lights, the server farms, and the unsung heroes who keep the digital world running, usually from that windowless room in the basement. Until then, don't wait for AI to replace you. Pick up the tools, learn them, and remember, the future favors the builders.